Imagine stumbling upon a hidden diary that reveals a shocking secret. A lone black woman, driven by unimaginable loss, single-handedly dismantles the Ku Klux Klan in post-Civil War America. Buried for decades, this tale of vengeance blurs the line between justice and horror, leaving behind a mystery that baffled federal agents and changed a community forever. What if the hunters became the hunted? Stick around as we uncover the chilling truth of the Harlan County vanishings of 1872, a story so explosive, history tried to erase it. A chilling mystery that began when a federal marshal discovered a field of silent white sentinels and a single name carved into the earth. It speaks of a dark chapter in America, of a horrific massacre that triggered an even more terrifying response. This is the story of the black woman who hunted the Ku Klux Klan, a hunt that ended only when she had hunted them all. How did one woman, armed with little more than a nurse's knowledge and a widow's grief, manage to dismantle an entire network of terror, leaving behind a crime that not even the federal government could explain? The answer lies hidden within two irreconcilable archives: the cold, baffled report of a U.S. Marshal and the scorched private diary of a woman who chose to become a ghost. Together, they document a case of vengeance so precise and so absolute that it blurred the line between justice and a litany of sin. The official record speaks of a community gripped by a sudden, inexplicable madness. But the private record, the diary of Mary Hale, tells a different story. It is the story of a hunt, of a promise kept in the dead of night, and of a fear that was made to change its color. Tonight, the narrative begins not in 1872, but over 80 years later, in the summer of 1960, during the demolition of a derelict farmhouse on the outskirts of Harlan County. A worker's crowbar struck something solid within a collapsed chimney wall. It was a small tin box, rusted shut, but remarkably preserved from the elements. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, was a single leather-bound diary. This artifact, now catalogued as the Hale Journal, provides the only first-hand account of the events that official history would either forget or deliberately ignore. It is a document that serves as the key to unlocking a far more public and unsettling piece of evidence filed away in the National Archives. That other document is U.S. Department of Justice File 72555, dated May 1873. It contains the official typed report of U.S. Marshal Robert E. Hayes, a man dispatched from Louisville to investigate the alleged disappearances of over 36 prominent white citizens from Harlan County. His report is a testament to clinical confusion, a formal admission of failure. It details a community paralyzed by a superstitious dread, a place where every citizen questioned offered only silence or fearful whispers of a vengeful spirit haunting the swamplands. The marshal found no bodies, no witnesses, and no motive he could comprehend. It is only when these two sources are placed side by side that a coherent narrative begins to emerge from the shadows of the past. The story they tell is not one of random violence, but of a calculated and systematic campaign of retribution. The marshal's public mystery finds its private, harrowing solution in the precise, steady hand of the diarist. The historical record shows a community falling into chaos. The private record documents one woman's methodical creation of that chaos, a deliberate and controlled demolition of a corrupt world built on fear. The diary's first entry serves as the inciting incident, the single stone that begins the avalanche. It is dated November 5, 1872, and it is written with a chilling absence of sentiment. It reads, "I have returned from a war to save the Union, only to find my Union destroyed. The farm is ash. My husband John is a ghost in the oak tree. They left their mark on my door. 3 letters. They think it is a warning. It is a list." This is the voice of Mary Hale, a former Union Army nurse, a woman trained to save lives who has just returned home to a personal massacre. Her words set the stage for a story that is not about grief, but about its terrible transformation into purpose. Mary's training had given her a profound understanding of the human body, of its weaknesses, its pressure points, and the delicate systems that sustain it. But the war had also given her an education in tactics, in the art of observation, and in the grim necessity of decisive action. She was uniquely equipped in both skill and motivation to confront the evil that had destroyed her world. Her diary was not to be a record of sorrow, but a field journal for the hunt that was to come. The world she returned to was one where the law was a tool of the powerful, and justice was a concept reserved for those who already held it in their hands. The local authorities, as she would soon document, were not impartial arbiters. They were active participants in the very system of terror that had taken her husband. She was utterly alone, an island of righteous fury in an ocean of complicity. There would be no appeals to the law, no pleas for help. The only authority she could rely on was the one she would forge herself. The initial pages of her journal are filled with a nurse's meticulous detail, but applied to a new and terrifying subject. She does not describe her emotions. She documents the evidence of the crime. She notes the depth and angle of the boot prints near the tree where John was found. She describes the particular weave of the rope, the chemical smell of the accelerant used on her home, and the precise sharp tool used to carve the Klan's emblem into her front door. It is the cold, detached analysis of a professional examining a sickness, diagnosing its symptoms before planning its complete and total excision. The historical setting of Harlan County in 1872 was a powder keg of resentment and violence. The promises of Reconstruction were met with a brutal backlash as secret societies like the Ku Klux Klan rose to enforce the old order through intimidation and bloodshed. For the newly freed black population, freedom was a fragile theoretical state, lived under the constant shadow of the night rider's torch. This was the world Mary Hale stepped back into, a world where the war had officially ended, but the battle for survival had just begun. And so, the central mystery is established from the outset, built upon the promise contained within these two disparate documents. One asks the question, what happened to the men of Harlan County? The other provides the terrifying answer. A woman stripped of everything she loved decided to become a greater monster than the ones who hunted in the night. Her simple vow, recorded in her own hand, hangs over the entire narrative. They will not sleep another night. The story to follow is the chronicle of how she kept that promise. The first piece of evidence that contradicts the official narrative of random, unexplained disappearances emerges just 1 week after John Hale's burial. It is found within Mary's diary, in an entry that details an act of profound psychological fortitude. She records her attendance at the Sunday service at the Redemption Baptist Church, a public appearance that the community would have seen as a sign of a grieving widow seeking solace. Her private writings, however, reveal a far colder purpose. She was not there to pray. She was there to study the anatomy of the town's soul, to identify the source of its infection. The anomaly, she documents, is a minute physical detail, the kind a trained observer would notice and a guilty man would overlook. Her focus was not on the platitudes of Preacher Thomas Reed's sermon, but on the man who stood beside him, Sheriff William Kane. As the sheriff offered a brief hollow eulogy for another recently deceased parishioner, Mary's gaze was fixed not on his face, but on his boots. Her entry reads, "He spoke of God's will and the mysterious ways of providence. I was not looking at his face, but at his boots. The left heel is worn at a sharp, unnatural angle. The red mud of our creek is still caked in the welt. It is the same track I found beside the oak tree." This observation is the first thread she pulls in the tightly woven conspiracy of silence that grips the county. Her diary shows her initial clinical attempt to rationalize the discovery. She notes that it could be a coincidence, that many men walk the creek path, but the tone of her writing, utterly devoid of doubt, suggests she believes no such thing. She has found her first verifiable link between the official power structure of the town and the murder of her husband. The law itself was present at the crime. The entry for that day is longer than the others, filled with sketches of the boot print from memory next to a detailed drawing of the one she found on her property. She annotates them with observations on weight distribution and the probable height of the wearer. It is the work of a field surgeon, not a detective, a mind trained to deduce internal realities from external signs. The worn heel was not just a clue. It was a symptom of a deeper malady, a moral deformity that afflicted the entire community. The public face of Sheriff Kane was that of a weary but steadfast keeper of the peace, a man doing his best to maintain order in a time of chaos. He was seen as a pillar of the white community, a bulwark against the perceived threats of Reconstruction. Mary's discovery shatters this perception. For her, and now for the reader of her journal, his public persona becomes a grotesque mask, concealing the violent hypocrisy that lay beneath. His presence in the church was not an act of faith, but a performance of innocence. This first anomaly sets the pattern for her entire investigation. She would not rely on confessions or hearsay. Her evidence would be tangible, physical, and irrefutable. It would be found in the overlooked details: a misplaced word, a nervous gesture, a stain on a cuff, or mud on a boot. She was applying a scientific method to unmasking a superstitious evil, using logic as a weapon against an enemy that thrived on fear and chaos. The discovery also marks a critical shift in her own psychological state, as documented in her writings. The raw, burning anger of the first few days begins to cool, solidifying into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The mission is no longer just about vengeance for John. It is about a more profound and terrifying form of justice. She must not only punish the guilty, but also expose the lie that allows them to walk freely in the daylight, cloaked in the robes of authority and faith. The sheriff's boots become a powerful symbol within the narrative of her journal. They represent the contamination of every institution in the town. The law, which should have protected her, had instead walked through the mud to murder her husband. The church, which should have offered sanctuary, now harbored the guilty. The very ground of Harlan County, she seems to conclude, is poisoned by the footsteps of these men. With this single documented anomaly, Mary's grief is fully transmuted into a quiet, dangerous investigation. A pillar of the community has been directly implicated through a verifiable physical detail. The mystery is no longer about a faceless mob of night riders. It is now a focused, personal hunt for a man who wears a badge in the day and a hood in the night. The hook is set. The audience knows she has her first target, and the tension lies in what a lone woman will do with such a deadly piece of knowledge. Following the discovery of the sheriff's complicity, Mary's diary entries become a masterclass in covert surveillance. She transforms herself into a ghost in her own community, a silent observer moving along the edges of society. The subsequent pages, presented chronologically, document the methodical accumulation of evidence that weaves Sheriff Kane into a much larger web. She records his movements with the precision of a naturalist studying a predator, noting the times he leaves his office, the routes he takes, and the company he keeps under the cover of darkness. Her observations soon reveal a consistent pattern. On at least 2 nights a week, Sheriff Kane leaves the town and rides out towards a secluded clearing near the old cypress swamp. He is never alone for long. He is soon joined by 2 other prominent figures, men who represent the other pillars of Harlan County's corrupt authority. The first is Preacher Thomas Reed, a man whose Sunday sermons are filled with fire and brimstone condemnations of the ungodly, a term he seems to apply to anyone who supports the federal government's Reconstruction efforts. The second man to join these clandestine meetings is Judge Henry Vaughn. By day, the judge presides over the county court with an air of solemn gravity. His official records, however, tell a different story, one that Mary likely already knew. Her diary notes, "Judge Vaughn has dismissed every charge brought against a white man for violence against our people since the war's end. He is the legal firewall that ensures the Klan's reign of terror continues without consequence. His presence at these meetings confirms that the entire justice system is rotten to its core." The diary entries for this period are a ledger of damning hypocrisy. Mary writes, "The preacher speaks of purity from the pulpit, yet he visits the widow Maeve after dark, a woman whose husband he condemned as a sinner. The judge speaks of the sanctity of the law, yet his back door is a revolving door for the very men who break it with impunity. They are a trinity bound by something other than faith. They are the law, the faith, and the justice of this county." This observation marks her understanding that she is not fighting a disorganized mob, but a structured, hierarchical organization. To corroborate her findings, she notes the deliberate absence of any official records related to these meetings. The town archives, which meticulously document every public council and court session, contain no mention of these late-night gatherings. This gap in the historical record is in itself a form of evidence. It is proof of a conspiracy of silence, an intentional erasure of the truth. The men who run the county in the daylight are the same men who rule it by terror in the night, and they have used their power to scrub their dark work from history. Mary's methods are patient and fraught with peril. She describes lying motionless in the undergrowth for hours, enduring the cold and the insects, her senses sharpened to a razor's edge. She sketches maps of their meeting places, diagrams their seating arrangements, and even attempts to transcribe snippets of their conversations carried on the night air. She is building a case not for a court of law that she knows is a sham, but for the sentence she alone will carry out. The evidence she gathers paints a horrifying picture of a shadow government. They are not just committing random acts of violence. They are making strategic decisions. She overhears discussions of which farms to target next, which outspoken black leaders to silence, and how to manipulate local elections. They are engaged in a systematic war to reclaim the power they believe they lost in the Civil War, and their violence is the primary instrument of their political will. This accumulation of evidence serves to isolate Mary further, but it also solidifies her resolve. She understands now that her husband was not a random victim. His success as a freedman farmer was a threat to their entire worldview, and his murder was a calculated message to the entire black community. Her fight, she realizes, is not just for John, but for the very possibility of a future for her people in this poisoned land. She has now mapped the entire corrupt power structure of the county. The mystery has deepened from a single murder to a systemic conspiracy involving the highest levels of local authority. The hook for the audience is the terrifying scale of the challenge she faces. It is no longer a question of who the enemy is. The enemy is the entire system. The question now becomes a far more desperate one. How can a single grieving woman possibly hope to dismantle a trinity of absolute power? An entry in Mary Hale's journal from early December 1872 marks a critical turning point in her psychological journey. It is here that she moves beyond simple data collection and formulates her first comprehensive theory of the evil that has consumed her home. The entry begins not with an observation, but with a stark, chilling conclusion. They are not three men. They are one body with three heads: the law, the faith, and the justice of this county. Cain provides the force, Reed the moral justification, and Vaughn the legal impunity. They are the local chapter of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. They are the head of the snake. This hypothesis is presented in her diary as an established fact, the inevitable conclusion drawn from the meticulous patterns she has recorded over weeks of silent observation. The scattered pieces of evidence, the boot print, the secret meetings, the biased court rulings, the hypocritical sermons, have now coalesced into a single, monstrous picture. She understands that to attack one is to alert the others. To bring down the organization, she cannot simply cut off one head of the Hydra. She must attack the body itself. To visualize this structure, she describes an act of quiet, obsessive ritual in her secluded, fire-damaged cabin. She has taken a map of the county and pinned it to the wall. Using black thread, she connects the homes of the three men, their offices, the church, the courthouse, and their secret meeting place in the swamp. The result, she writes, is a spider's web with the three leaders at its center, their lines of influence radiating outwards to touch every corner of the community. Her mission, she concludes, is to become the flame that burns the web to ash. Her training as a nurse informs her strategy. She sees the Klan not as a military force to be defeated, but as a disease to be eradicated. A disease, she notes, often attacks the head first, the command and control centers. By targeting the leadership, she can sow chaos and paranoia within the ranks. If the heads are severed, the body will thrash and die. This medical analogy dominates her writing, transforming her quest for vengeance into a grim clinical procedure. She is not a killer. She is a surgeon performing a necessary, radical excision. This formulation of her hypothesis also reveals a profound understanding of her enemy's psychological weaknesses. Their power, she writes, is derived from two sources: their anonymity and the fear it creates. They are powerful because they are a faceless monolithic entity, a supernatural force that strikes from the darkness. Her strategy, therefore, must be to turn these weapons against them. She must become an even greater mystery, a more terrifying and unpredictable phantom than they could ever be. The weight of this knowledge is palpable in her writing. She expresses no fear for her own safety, only a cold, methodical focus on the task ahead. The emotional core of her entries has been cauterized, replaced by a sense of historical and moral necessity. She is no longer just a grieving widow. She has accepted the role of an avenging angel, an instrument of a justice that heaven and earth have both failed to provide. Her personal pain has become the fuel for an impersonal, almost elemental force. This section of the diary is crucial because it marks the end of the investigation phase and the beginning of the operational phase. She has identified her targets, understood their structure, and formulated a strategy for their destruction. The narrative tension shifts from the discovery of the truth to the anticipation of action. The audience is now fully aware of the stakes and the terrifying scale of her ambition. The hypothesis is also a moment of profound isolation. By identifying the enemy as the entire power structure, she solidifies the fact that she has no allies. There is no one she can trust, no authority she can appeal to. The police, the church, and the courts are all part of the disease. This total isolation is both a source of immense danger and the key to her strength. As a lone operator, she is unpredictable, untraceable, and utterly free from the constraints of law or conventional morality. The hook is now firmly set. The enemy has a name, a face, and a structure. Mary has a plan. The audience is left with a sense of dreadful inevitability. The question is no longer if she will act, but when and how. The formulation of her hypothesis is the final deep breath before the plunge into a war fought in the shadows, a war that will have no witnesses and no survivors among the guilty. The narrative now shifts from surveillance to action, documenting the first tangible consequence of Mary's vow. In late December 1872, a palpable tremor of unease runs through Harlan County. The first of the three leaders, Sheriff William Kane, is reported missing. He had left his office for his nightly patrol and simply vanished. The initial assumption among the white community is that he has been attacked by outsiders, perhaps federal agents or carpetbaggers, a theory that fuels their paranoia and self-righteous anger. The official search finds nothing but his horse. Mary Hale's diary entry for that day is a masterpiece of cold, laconic understatement. It consists of a single sentence: "The shepherd has lost his way." There is no confession, no description of the act, only a quiet biblical pronouncement of a deed done. This deliberate omission of detail is more chilling than any graphic account could be. It transforms the act from a physical confrontation into an almost supernatural event, a quiet erasure from existence. The man is not dead. He is simply gone. Days later, the social fracture deepens. The sheriff's horse, which had been taken in by the town blacksmith, is found one morning wandering in the main square. Its saddlebags, once filled with the tools of the law, are now empty, save for a single disturbing object: a crudely stitched Klansman's hood, soiled with mud, and what looks like a dark, unsettling bloom of dried blood. The discovery sends a wave of shock and confusion through the town. The symbol of their power has been returned to them, not as a trophy, but as a warning. Mary's journal meticulously records the impact of this act on the community. The initial theory of an outside attacker begins to crumble, replaced by a far more insidious fear. The presence of the hood suggests an internal conflict, a betrayal within the ranks of the Knights. The men who once rode together with absolute trust now begin to look at each other with suspicion. Who among them could have done this? Who had a grudge against the sheriff? The monolithic entity of the Klan begins to show its first cracks. She writes with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Fear was once their tool, a fire they used to shape the world to their will. Now it is their master. It has turned inward, consuming them like a fever. They look for the phantom among themselves, never suspecting it walks in plain sight, dressed in a widow's black. Her strategy is working perfectly. She has successfully weaponized their own secrecy and paranoia against them. The disappearance of the sheriff creates a power vacuum, and the social order he maintained begins to fray. Minor disputes escalate into brawls. The remaining leaders, Preacher Reed and Judge Vaughn, attempt to project an image of calm and control, but Mary notes the strain in their public appearances. Their sermons and rulings become more strident, more desperate. They are trying to hold together an organization that is rotting from the inside out with suspicion. For the Black community, the event is met with a quiet, fearful hope. No one speaks of it openly, but a new energy circulates in hushed whispers. The monster that has haunted their nights has, for the first time, shown vulnerability. The disappearance of the sheriff is a sign that the oppressive order is not as immutable as it once seemed. For them, the returned hood is not a threat, but a promise that the hunters can themselves be hunted. The social fracture is not just between the Klan and its victims, it is within the Klan itself. Mary documents overheard conversations in the general store, whispers of secret meetings being called, and accusations being leveled. Men who were once bound by a shared, hateful ideology are now being driven apart by individual self-preservation. Her single silent act has done more damage to their organization than any armed resistance could have achieved. She has introduced an element of the unknown into their world of rigid, hateful certainty. They are fighting a ghost, an enemy with no face, no name, and no predictable motive. This social and psychological fracture is the first major victory in her war. She has not just removed a man, she has destabilized his entire network. The hook is the escalating tension. One leader is gone, and two remain. The audience is left to wonder who will be next, and how the escalating fear will manifest in a community already on the edge of chaos. The fear and paranoia simmering in Harlan County reach a boiling point in the first week of January 1873. Following the same pattern as the sheriff, the second head of the Trinity, Preacher Thomas Reed, disappears. He fails to arrive for his Sunday sermon, an unprecedented event that throws his congregation into a panic. A search party is formed, but like before, they find no trace of the man himself. This time, however, the evidence left behind is not ambiguous. It is a direct, terrifying, and deeply personal message. Nailed to the heavy oak doors of the Redemption Baptist Church, the very place from which he preached his sermons of hate, is the preacher's own Klan hood. It is affixed with a single large blacksmith's nail driven through the center of the forehead, and on the wood of the door, painted in a dark, viscous liquid that could only be blood, is a simple three-word message. I saw your face. The symbolism is irrefutable and absolute. The sacred space of the church has been desecrated, and the anonymity of the Klan has been shattered. This act sends a shockwave through the entire county. For the members of the Klan, the message is a horrifying confirmation of their deepest fears. The phantom that hunts them is not an outsider. It is someone who knows them, someone who has been in their midst, someone who has seen them without their masks. The paranoia that was once a whisper now becomes a deafening roar. Every stranger is a suspect, and every familiar face is a potential traitor. Their power, built on the fear they project, is now completely eclipsed by the fear they feel. The impact on Mary Hale is documented in a diary entry from that night, an entry that marks her full and final transformation. Her conviction is reinforced, stripped of any remaining human hesitation. She writes, "They wear a mask to hide from God and man, believing that the darkness will absolve them of their sins. I will make the mask their only legacy, their names, their bodies, their place in this world. All will be forfeit. Only the symbol of their sin will remain as a testament to their evil. I am not an executioner. I am an archivist of their damnation." Her mission has now transcended personal vengeance. It has become a theological and historical imperative. She is not simply killing men. She is erasing them from the record of the living, ensuring that their only mark on history is the symbol of their own hatred. It is a form of justice so profound and so terrible that it borders on the divine. She has appointed herself the arbiter of their eternal legacy, and their sentence is to become nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the dark. The disappearance of the preacher and the public display of his hood have a devastating effect on the morale of the remaining Klansmen. Mary's diary records a sharp decline in their activities. There are no more night rides. The campaign of terror that had held the county in its grip for years has come to an abrupt and total halt. The monsters are now too afraid of the dark to venture into it. They have become the terrified victims of the very tactics they once employed. The message on the church door also serves as a public declaration. While the white community is consumed with fear, the black community understands its deeper meaning. It is a promise that their oppressors are not invincible, that their identities are known, and that a force of justice is moving silently among them. The fear that once kept them in their homes at night is slowly being replaced by a fragile, defiant hope. The Night Woman, as the first whispers of the legend begin to call her, is their protector. This piece of irrefutable evidence solidifies Mary's role in the narrative as a force of nature. She is no longer just a character. She is the living embodiment of a moral correction. Her actions are as precise and as unstoppable as a plague or a flood. She is cleansing the land, not with fire and brimstone, but with a quiet, focused terror that mirrors the hypocrisy of her victims. The church, once a symbol of their moral authority, is now a monument to their fear. The hook is now at its peak. 2 of the 3 leaders are gone, and their organization is in shambles. Only one remains, Judge Henry Vaughn. The audience knows he is the final target, the last head of the snake. The tension is no longer about whether Mary can succeed, but about the form her final act of judgment will take. The hunt has become a holy war, and all that is left is the final, terrible sermon to be delivered to the last remaining sinner. With both of his primary Confederates gone, Judge Henry Vaughn, the final and most powerful head of the Harlan County Trinity, finds himself utterly alone. He is the sole remaining pillar of a collapsing temple, and the full weight of the community's fear and paranoia now rests upon his shoulders. The sources from this period, primarily Mary's diary and later anecdotal town records, document the rapid and total disintegration of his authority and his mind. The man who once wielded the law as a weapon now finds himself a prisoner of his own terror. Mary's diary entries from this time shift from surveillance of a group to a focused psychological study of a single unraveling man. She details his increasingly erratic behavior with the cold precision of a physician charting the final stages of a fatal disease. Judge Vaughn barricades himself in his large, stately home on the edge of town. Refusing to see visitors, he is seen pacing behind his windows at all hours of the night, a lantern in one hand and a shotgun in the other. His once formidable presence in the courtroom is replaced by a string of canceled sessions and incoherent rulings. The diary records local rumors that he has taken to drinking heavily, his days and nights blurring into a haze of alcohol and fear. He is heard shouting at shadows in his own yard, convinced that the phantom is lurking just beyond the reach of his lamplight. His authority, which was once absolute and unquestioned, has completely collapsed into a state of siege warfare against an enemy that exists only in his mind and, unbeknownst to him, in the quiet observations of the woman he has wronged. In a desperate act, Judge Vaughn petitions the governor of Kentucky for the state militia to be deployed to Harlan County. A copy of his letter, preserved in the state archives, is a testament to his broken mental state. He does not speak of missing persons or civil unrest. Instead, he claims the county is beset by a demonic insurrection, a supernatural agent of the devil sent to punish the righteous. His plea is dismissed by the governor's office as the drunken, superstitious ravings of a man who has lost his grip on reality. The system he once manipulated so masterfully has now abandoned him. Mary's analysis of his decline is chillingly insightful. She writes, "A man like Vaughn, whose entire identity is built upon a foundation of control, cannot survive in a world he cannot command. His fear is not of death but of powerlessness. He is not afraid of the phantom. He is afraid of the fact that the phantom has rendered him irrelevant." She understands that his psychological collapse is a more potent weapon than any physical threat she could pose. She has not laid a hand on him, yet she is destroying him from the inside out. The remaining members of the Klan, leaderless and terrified, look to the judge for guidance and find only a broken, paranoid man. His collapse signals the final death knell of their organization. There is no one to provide the legal protection that made their violence possible. Without the judge's impunity, they are just common criminals, and their courage, which was always a group phenomenon, evaporates completely. They disavow their oaths and retreat into the shadows, hoping the phantom will overlook them. Mary notes in her diary that Vaughn's desperation will inevitably make him careless. "A cornered animal," she writes, will always make a fatal mistake. She predicts that in his paranoia, he will attempt to consolidate or protect the one thing that connects him to his crimes, the one piece of evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. She decides to stop observing from a distance and to begin preparing for the final phase of her plan. She will use his fear to draw him out, not into a fight, but into an act of self-incrimination. The collapse of Judge Vaughn's authority is the climax of Mary's psychological campaign. She has successfully dismantled the entire power structure of the county without firing a single shot in open conflict. She has proven that the fear they wielded was a fragile construct, easily shattered by a more potent, more focused, and more righteous terror. The system has not been defeated. It has devoured itself. The hook is now a question of strategy. The final head of the snake is cornered, terrified, and on the verge of making a critical error. The audience is primed for the final confrontation, not a physical battle, but a battle of wits between the methodical hunter and her desperate, broken prey. The tension lies in anticipating what mistake the judge will make and how Mary will exploit it to bring her terrible war to its conclusion. Judge Henry Vaughn's fatal error, the careless move born of pure terror that Mary had predicted, is meticulously documented in her journal. In a paranoid frenzy, believing that the phantom must be one of his own men seeking to betray him, the judge decides he must secure the Klan's most vital secrets. He undertakes this task himself, under the cover of a moonless night, a decision that seals his fate. His mistake was to believe the threat was internal, a flaw in his character that Mary had already diagnosed. He could not conceive of an enemy superior to his own cunning. His action was simple and desperate. He went to the county courthouse, the seat of his power, and retrieved a heavy, locked wooden chest from a hidden compartment in the records room. This chest, Mary surmised, contained the one thing that could destroy them all: their records. He transported it back to his barricaded home, believing it would be safe within his personal fortress. What he failed to realize was that his every move was being watched by the very phantom he sought to outwit. He was not protecting his secrets. He was delivering them into her hands, That same night, Mary puts the final phase of her plan into motion. Her diary entry describes her preparations with the calm, procedural detail of a nurse preparing for surgery. She uses her knowledge of herbs and botany, a skill learned from her mother and honed in the army hospitals, to create a powerful sedative. She soaks pieces of meat in the concoction and leaves them near the edges of the judge's property for his ever-watchful guard dogs. The act is silent, efficient, and leaves no trace. With the dogs pacified, she approaches the house. She does not force a lock or break a window. Her earlier surveillance had revealed a weakness, a loose cellar grate at the rear of the house, obscured by overgrown ivy. She slips into the darkness of the judge's home as easily as a whisper. Her objective is not the man himself, but the wooden chest he has just moved. She finds it in his study, placed beneath his heavy oak desk, as if the furniture itself could offer protection. The hidden source she discovers inside is more damning than she could have ever imagined. It is not a collection of letters or meeting minutes. It is a thick, leather-bound Klan ledger. Inside, written in Judge Vaughn's own meticulous, elegant script, is a complete and detailed record of the Harlan County chapter of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. It contains an alphabetical list of every member, the dates of their initiation, and their oaths of loyalty, each one signed in their own blood-red ink. The discovery fundamentally alters the scope and nature of Mary's mission. Her hunt had, until this point, been focused on the three heads of the organization. She had believed that by removing the leadership, the body would wither and die. But the ledger in her hands revealed the true, terrifying extent of the disease. It was not just 3 men, it was dozens. The blacksmith, the general store owner, the deacon from the church, men she saw every day, men who presented a face of civility to the world, were all implicated. Her diary entry upon returning to her ruined cabin that night is electric with a new, terrible purpose. She writes, "I came for the architects of my husband's death, but this book is a testament to the foundation. He did not give me a list of targets. He gave me a congregation, and I shall deliver the final sermon." The ledger has transformed her personal war of vengeance into a total war of purification. The discovery of this hidden source is the final piece of the puzzle. It provides her with the irrefutable proof of a conspiracy that encompasses the entire social fabric of the white community. It is the tool that will allow her to complete her work with the surgical precision she has envisioned from the beginning. There will be no innocents overlooked and no guilty men spared. The hook is now absolute and terrifying. The scope of Mary's mission has expanded monumentally. Her hunt is no longer for 3 leaders, but for an entire organization, a list of names she now holds in her hands. The audience is left with a single dreadful question. What will she do with this newfound power? What does justice look like when its target is not an individual, but an entire community of sinners? The discovery of the Klan ledger marks the final, irrevocable shift in the tone of Mary Hale's diary. The language of observation and psychological analysis disappears completely, replaced by the cold, detached lexicon of a field nurse preparing for a mass casualty event. The subsequent entries are not reflections. They are operational plans. They are a chillingly calm and methodical detailing of the preparations for the final sweeping act of her war. She is no longer studying a disease. She is preparing the instruments for its complete and total eradication. Her writings from this period read like a grim logistical checklist. She describes her journeys into the cypress swamp, not to hide, but to harvest. She identifies and gathers poisonous flora, noting their properties and optimal dosages with scientific precision. Oleander, with its ability to disrupt the heart's rhythm. Water hemlock, which paralyzes the nervous system. She is turning the very land her enemies sought to control into an arsenal for their destruction. Each plant, each root, each berry is a silent natural weapon in her hands. See, alongside her botanical work, she begins a series of physical preparations. She details the digging of deep pits in remote, marshy sections of the swamp, areas where the ground is perpetually soft and unlikely to be disturbed. She describes the weaving of snares from thick, fibrous vines, testing their strength and placement with the patience of a seasoned trapper. Every action is precise, efficient, and purposeful. There is no hint of rage or passion in her words, only the focused, dispassionate energy of a professional completing a difficult but necessary task. The ledger itself becomes her primary tool. One by one, she begins to mark the names. Her diary entries cross-reference the names in the ledger with her own knowledge of the men's routines, their habits, and their vulnerabilities. She tailors her approach to each individual. For a man known for his greed, she hints at a hidden treasure. For a man known for his infidelity, she uses the lure of a secret tryst. She is not just a hunter. She is a master of psychological manipulation, turning each man's personal sin into the instrument of his own undoing. Her justification for this final terrible action is laid out in a single powerful entry. It is here that she articulates the moral philosophy that guides her. She writes, "This is not murder. It is an excision. A cancer cannot be reasoned with, nor can it be partially removed. It must be cut out completely, down to the last corrupted cell, so that the body might have a chance to heal. I am not taking lives. I am removing a sickness that prevents life from flourishing. This is not an act of vengeance. It is an act of sanitation." The suspense in these passages is built not through action, but through the chillingly calm and procedural language of her preparations. The audience is made a witness to the meticulous planning of a massacre, described with the emotional detachment of a farmer planning her planting season. The horror comes from the stark contrast between the terrible nature of her goal and the rational, almost scientific manner in which she approaches it. She is utterly convinced of the righteousness of her cause. Her decision is also an act of profound historical agency. She is not just punishing the men who murdered her husband. She is actively rewriting the future of Harlan County by removing the entire Klan network. She is creating a vacuum, a space where a different, more just society might have a chance to grow. She is not just a destroyer. She is a brutal, uncompromising creator, clearing the ground for a new beginning. The final entries before the disappearances begin are the most unsettling. They are simply lists of names with dates written beside them. It is a schedule. The diary has transformed from a journal of grief and investigation into a surgeon's appointment book. The meticulous planning is complete. The time for observation is over. The time for the final, decisive action has arrived. The hook is now at its most intense. The audience knows what is coming. They have seen the plan, they understand the justification, and they have the list of names. All that remains is to witness the execution. The narrative has built to a point of unbearable tension, a quiet, dreadful moment before the storm breaks and the strange, terrible harvest begins. The climax of the story is delivered not through a narrative description of events, but through the stark, unadorned presentation of the two final primary sources. The first is the last legible entry in the diary of Mary Hale. It is dated April 20th, 1873, several weeks after the final name in the Klan ledger would have been accounted for. The entry is brief, poetic, and filled with a sense of final, grim accomplishment. The handwriting is as steady and controlled as it was on the first page, showing a mind unburdened by guilt. The entry reads, "The winter snows have melted. The ground is soft enough for planting. I have spent the cold months harvesting their symbols, collecting them as a farmer collects seed. Now I have tilled the soil of their terror and sown a new crop in its place. Tonight, the field will bear its strange and terrible fruit. Let it stand as a warning. Let it stand as a monument. Fear has a new name in this valley. It is Mary." This is her final sermon, her explanation, and her signature, left for a history she knew would not understand. Immediately following the reading of this passage, the narrative presents the second final primary source. It is a direct, verbatim excerpt from the official report filed by U.S. Marshal Robert E. Hayes in May of 1873, upon the conclusion of his fruitless investigation into the Harlan County disappearances. The language is the complete antithesis of Mary's poetic prose. It is sterile, bureaucratic, and filled with the cold, factual observations of a man confronting something utterly beyond his comprehension. The Marshal's report states, "And on the final day of our search, acting on an anonymous tip, we discovered the field in question, located approximately 1 mile north of the old Hale property. The field contained no crops. Instead, approximately 30 wooden stakes had been driven into the ground, arranged in a deliberate semicircle facing the rising sun. Upon each stake was hung a white hood of the Ku Klux Klan, each one weathered and stained. In the precise center of this arrangement stood a large inverted crucifix, its timbers charred as if by a powerful fire. Carved deeply into the earth at its base was a single 4-letter word, Mary." The juxtaposition of these two documents is the interpretive climax of the entire story. Mary's diary provides the motive, the why. The Marshal's report provides the horrifying, inexplicable result, the what. The audience is left to bridge the gap between the two, to comprehend the scale of the quiet, methodical massacre that took place in the intervening weeks. There is no battle, no struggle, only a chillingly silent and efficient purge. The Marshal's report continues, noting that an extensive search of the surrounding area revealed no graves, no bodies, and no signs of a struggle. The men had simply vanished, leaving behind only the symbols of their hateful creed. The display was not an act of rage, but a carefully constructed piece of symbolic art, a macabre outdoor museum dedicated to the death of an idea. It was, as Mary had intended, a monument. The interpretation is left to the audience, guided by the two sources. The field of hoods is the physical manifestation of Mary's promise. She has stripped her enemies of their names, their bodies, and their histories. She has reduced them to their single, defining sin, the hood. It is an act of ultimate, symbolic justice, a historical erasure so complete that it borders on the supernatural. The final chilling detail is the name carved in the earth. It is both a signature and a challenge. It grounds the seemingly supernatural event in a human agent, a woman who has remade the world in her own image. The name Mary itself, a word associated with a lost paradise, is here reclaimed as a symbol of a terrible, righteous cleansing. She has not restored the old Eden, but created a new one, born of fire and blood and an uncompromising will. The mystery is solved. The full, horrific scale of Mary's justice is revealed through the eyes of an impartial and utterly horrified observer. The hook is the profound moral and philosophical question that remains. The audience has been shown the crime and the retribution. Now, they must sit with the consequences and decide for themselves if what happened in that field was an act of justice or an act of monstrous, unforgivable vengeance. The immediate aftermath of the events of 1873 is a story told not in diaries, but in the cold, impersonal data of secondary historical records. The official conclusion of Marshall Hayes's investigation was that the missing men of Harlan County had likely fallen victim to a violent, internal power struggle within the Klan, and that the survivors had fled the state to escape prosecution or further retribution. This official narrative, born of a lack of evidence, became the accepted history, a convenient fiction that allowed the outside world to move on. Within Harlan County itself, the consequences were far more profound and lasting. A report from the Kentucky Telegraph newspaper in late 1874 refers to the area as the Silent County. The journalist describes a community gripped by a superstitious dread, a place where families had shuttered their homes and moved away, and where the remaining residents refused to speak of the events of the previous year. The economic and social vitality of the county had collapsed, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell haunted by the ghosts of the men who had vanished. The most striking evidence of Mary's impact is found in the U.S. Census records. A comparative analysis of the 1870 and 1880 records reveals a significant and inexplicable demographic anomaly. Harlan County shows a sharp, statistically impossible decline in the number of adult white males between the ages of 30 and 50. This decline is not reflected in neighboring counties, ruling out migration or economic factors. It is a silent, numerical testament to the efficacy of Mary's purge, a statistical scar left on the body of history. As for Mary Hale herself, her name disappears from all official records after 1873. A petition was filed by a distant cousin in 1880 to have her declared legally dead in order to settle the affairs of her husband's ruined estate. With no one to contest it, the motion was passed. Officially, Mary Hale ceased to exist, a footnote in a local property dispute. She vanished from the written record as completely as the men she had hunted. But while her official history ended, her legend was just beginning. Her name and her story survived, not in books, but in the oral traditions of the local black families. For generations, they spoke in hushed tones of a night woman, a spirit of vengeance who had risen from the ashes of a burned farm to protect them. They said she could walk without sound, that she knew the secrets of the swamp, and that she had swallowed the white ghosts who rode in the night, leaving only their empty skins behind. This folklore is the true legacy of her actions. For the white community, the story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of secret societies, a ghost story used to frighten children. But for the black community, it became a foundational myth, a story of empowerment and deliverance. It was a testament to the idea that even in the darkest of times, when the law and God both seem to have turned their backs, justice can still find a way, even if it must wear a terrifying face. The land itself seemed to hold the memory of what had happened. The field where the hoods were found was never plowed or planted again. It was considered cursed ground, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. Local property deeds from the late 19th and early 20th centuries show that the parcel of land was consistently excluded from sales, passed over as if it were a geographical scar that could not be healed. Mary's impact, therefore, was permanent and multifaceted. She had broken the Klan's power, altered the demographic makeup of a county, and transformed herself from a historical person into a mythological figure. She had become a ghost story, a statistical anomaly, and a symbol of a terrible necessary justice. The protagonist is gone, her purpose served. But the consequences of her actions continue to ripple through the generations, measured in both the cold, hard data of the archives and the warm, whispered legends passed down around the hearth. The historical record shows a mystery. The local memory preserves the truth. The final analysis of the Harlan County disappearances leaves us stranded between two irreconcilable truths. On one side, we have the official, documented history, a narrative of confusion and unresolved questions. Marshall Hayes's report concluded that the most likely explanation was a schism within the Klan, a violent purge followed by a mass exodus. It is a rational, bloodless explanation for a series of events that defied rational explanation. It is the story that history chose to remember because it was the easiest one to tell. On the other side, we have the explosive, terrible truth offered by the Diary of Mary Hale, a document that recontextualizes the entire affair. It transforms a story of rural crime into an epic of methodical personal warfare. It posits a single human agent as the cause of the collapse of an entire social order. Mary's journal offers a narrative that is more complete, more compelling, and infinitely more disturbing. It suggests that history is shaped not only by movements and armies, but by the focused, unbreakable will of a single, wronged individual. The two accounts cannot both be true in the eyes of historical record-keeping, yet they are inextricably linked. The Marshal's report documents the effect. Mary's diary documents the cause. Without the diary, the field of hoods is a bizarre, unsolved crime. Without the Marshal's report, the diary is merely the dark fantasy of a grieving widow. It is only by holding both documents in our hands that we can glimpse the full, terrifying picture of what happened in the woods and swamps of Kentucky in 1872. The legacy of these events is a permanent silence. The bodies of the missing men were never found. The land where the hoods were displayed remains unplowed to this day. A fallow field on the edge of the cypress swamp, known to locals simply as the Stake Field. It is a place where history feels physically present, a wound on the landscape that has never fully healed. It serves as a quiet, physical reminder of a chapter of American history that was violently erased before it could even be written. The final piece of evidence to consider is an old, faded photograph taken by a traveling photographer in the early 1900s. It is the only known image of the site. It shows the field, overgrown with weeds and tall grass. But, visible just barely, are the weathered, skeletal remains of the wooden stakes, still standing in their silent semicircle after 30 years, like the gravestones of men who were never buried. They are a testament to the endurance of memory, and to the permanence of Mary's final macabre work of art. The story of Mary Hale is a testament to the idea that the arc of the moral universe is long, but in the absence of justice it can be bent by a human hand into a terrible, swift sword. Her actions force us to confront a deeply unsettling question, one that resonates from the dark past of Reconstruction all the way to our present day. When the law is the criminal, when the church is the accomplice, and when the court is the conspirator, what is the true face of justice? Her diary offers one possible brutal answer. It suggests that sometimes the only way to fight a monster is to become a more disciplined, more intelligent, and more relentless monster yourself. It is a deeply uncomfortable truth, and one that the official records will never acknowledge. The full story of the silent county remains buried, not in a grave, but in the unresolved tension between the history we choose to write and the truths we are too afraid to speak. The final question, then, is not what happened to the men of Harlan County. The final question is, what happens to a society when a woman like Mary Hale is created? What happens when the victims of a system of terror decide to stop being victims and instead become a system of terror themselves? The answer, it seems, is a silence that lasts for generations in a field of empty hoods, waiting for a history that has the courage to finally tell their story. If this hidden chapter of American history left you stunned, hit that like button to show your support for uncovering more untold stories. Drop a comment below. What do you think, justice or vengeance? And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another dive into the shadows of the past. Thanks for watching, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.